Here in Bolivia's main city, La Paz, Ernesto Che Guevara lives. He's on t-shirts and posters, an icon of the struggle for equality and freedom. His resolute gaze appears in different forms all over the city. And by the bridge which links working-class El Alto and the city of La Paz beneath, another iconic image of Che Guevara. This time it's a statue made entirely out of scrap metal. One of South America's poorest nations, and one that today characterizes itself as anti-imperialist. Bolivia embraces Guevara and the values he stood for.
Luchó por los pobres, por una justicia igual, defendió a los más débiles, no solamente en Bolivia, también en otros países.
Street vendors or students still passionately discuss his achievements and his shortcomings.
Es arcaico pensar que con tu pistola vas a poder cambiar el sistema de un país. Yo creo que si tienes buenos ideales, está bien, lúchalos, y eso es lo que yo admiro del Che, que siempre ha tenido, ¿no? Sus ideales bien puestos. Pero tampoco está bueno que tú te metas a un país al cual no conoces, al cual no sabes su contexto, y vengas a hacer revolución.
Debate continues over the actions of the man known by most simply as El Che, but few dispute his convictions.
Hay una frase que dice, el Che no es un logo, el Che es un pensamiento, una forma, ¿no? Incluso de vivir. Entonces muchos lo toman como solo un logo, sí, yo soy de Che, soy socialista, yo hago esto, pero ni siquiera, digamos, se preocupan en ver realmente cuál era el objetivo con el que él ha venido aquí, digamos, o qué sentido todavía tiene en la actualidad.
Here in Bolivia, it seems Che Guevara is far from consigned to the history books. Students of every political persuasion gather together here under this imposing image of Che Guevara in a garden dedicated to his legacy here in La Paz's main public university. The iconic presence of Che Guevara still looms large here in Bolivia. The revolutionary disguised himself as a balding Uruguayan businessman in order to travel to Bolivia in 1966. Back then, Bolivia and much of South America was enemy territory. Today, Guevara is the figurehead of Bolivia's principal workers' union, the Centro Obrero Boliviano. Jorge Valdivieso is its culture secretary.
Varias organizaciones manejan la imagen del Che porque él ha dejado mucha huella acá en Bolivia, pese a haber muerto acá por el ejército boliviano. Ha dejado un legado de lucha, de unidad, de no dejarse avasallar por quienes siempre nos han manejado, nos han dominado, nos han gobernado.
But the story of Che in Bolivia is also one of disillusion and ultimately failure. It takes place hundreds of miles from this high-altitude city in the scrubland and mountain valleys of Bolivia's east. La Higuera is the tiny hamlet where Ernesto Che Guevara met his end. Captured by the Bolivian army after a firefight in the canyon below, he was brought here. Some villagers are old enough to remember that day in October 1967.
Pero nosotros no sabíamos quién era el Che porque en el grupo y con el miedo que teníamos nosotros, todos éramos encerrados entre nuestras casas, ocultados.
Irma Rosado took him a bowl of soup when he was held prisoner here. She's seen her tiny village transformed by what happened that day. This remote place brings a steady trail of pilgrims, mostly backpackers.
Mucha emoción, se me pone la piel de gallina cuando entré al museo, piel de gallina, sí, porque un compatriota, ¿no?, que hizo tanto por América Latina.
But beyond the backpackers, the t-shirts and the souvenirs, there's a more direct legacy. A legacy of which Guevara, a medical doctor, would likely have been proud. A state-of-the-art clinic with a birthing bed, a drip, and medical equipment for emergency care, thanks to the Cuban government. In this remote village of 24 families, it's a vast improvement in medical care. Running this clinic is Dr. Juan Andrés Linares, with Cuba's International Medical Brigade. He told CCTV he felt overwhelmed to have been sent here. to where Che died.
Es una impresión fenomenal. A veces uno, en cuanto uno llegó, que ve al museo, que se imagina aquellos momentos, pues a veces es difícil aguantar y hasta las lágrimas a veces salen y eso, porque imaginarse, ¿no?, el momento. Es muy emocionante, muy emocionante. Yo vine incluso por un término de aproximadamente 6 meses y más bien pedí prórroga por un año más porque me siento muy bien trabajando aquí.
In military terms, Guevara's Bolivia campaign was an abject failure. He and his band of guerrillas were finally surrounded by Bolivian soldiers at the bottom of this steep, wooded canyon. Here is where Che Guevara was captured. He and another guerrilla had taken cover behind this rock. They were surrounded by Bolivian soldiers. He was wounded in the leg and his weapon had been destroyed. It was the end of what had been a disastrous campaign. It was a 28-year-old Bolivian army captain, Gary Prado, who captured the iconic revolutionary. He recalls that moment.
I always find it interesting when reporters or journalists come to me and say, "And what did you think when you saw yourself in front of Che Guevara?" Wow. I answer, I felt pity, you know, because he looked so poor, so tired, so dirty that you couldn't feel he was a hero. No way.
But the experience changed his life, he tells CCTV. He wrote books about it. Later, he became an ambassador in the UK and Mexico and went into politics. He has no regrets.
Yeah, I'm proud of what I did and proud of being able to lead my men into this operation. And not forgetting that this was an invasion of my country, an armed invasion to Bolivia by foreign people. So no, there's no excuse for that. My responsibility as an officer of the army was to fight against these invaders of my country.
Guevara was treated with respect as his prisoner, he insists. But the next day, presidential orders came to execute Ernesto Che Guevara. Prado says he was in the field and had nothing to do with carrying out the order. But he has no qualms about admitting that he was given training by the US military in the United States. What is now clear is that the US played a hand in Guevara's capture. Declassified US government documents show that US Army officers trained and supplied Bolivian soldiers, though did not take part in operations. It was the height of the Cold War, and the US government saw Cuba and global communism as a clear and present danger. The US was at war in Vietnam, and it took seriously Guevara's pledge to create 10 Vietnams in Latin America. In hindsight, Guevara's aims seem far from possible. Here ended Che Guevara's dream of spreading his revolution through the continent of Latin America. He was summarily executed here in what used to be the village schoolroom. Perhaps no one at that time could have imagined this place would become a museum dedicated to his legacy. Tentative news of Guevara's death soon reached the ears of the then US President Lyndon Johnson. Walt Whitman Rostow, a prominent US economic historian who served as Johnson's national security advisor, informs him in this cable. Rostow refers to the Bolivian army unit as the one we have been training for some time. The Bolivian army flew Guevara's body to the Señor de Malta hospital in the nearest town of Valle Grande. The Bolivian military put Che Guevara's body on display on this concrete wash basin for 2 days. On the first day they invited the authorities and the press, and on the second day the general public were allowed to visit. And this humble hospital laundry room has become a place of pilgrimage ever since. It was an attempt to definitively prove he was dead, but as local nuns cut locks of his hair, believing he resembled Jesus Christ, it only served to perpetuate his myth. In an apparent attempt to quash that myth, soldiers buried the body of Guevara and other guerrillas in a secret mass grave. It was 30 years later that Guevara's remains were exhumed and returned to Cuba. The spot where he and his companions were buried is now in the center of this mausoleum, built by the Cuban government. Guevara was one of Latin America's first disappeared, a tactic subsequently used by military dictatorships across the continent, says Carlos Soria, a historian who's chronicled his Bolivia campaign.
Se inauguró esa nefasta época de las dictaduras en América Latina y el hecho de haber estado enterrado en Bolivia tanto tiempo, el haber muerto aquí, el haber sido asesinado aquí y las formas contradictorias en las que se informó de su muerte, eso contribuyó a a alimentar el mito, pero además a alimentar una relación mucho más directa, más estrecha de Bolivia hacia el Che.
Soria has painstakingly compiled and published Guevara's diaries from his ill-fated Bolivia expedition. Guevara's image has been appropriated by the leftist government of President Evo Morales, he says, and Che has become part of popular culture.
Son las ironías de la historia, ¿no? El Che intentó ser mostrado como un invasor, como una persona que había atentado contra la soberanía del país, y de ese modo se intentó justificar su muerte, en realidad su asesinato, su desaparición forzada. Pero la historia da sus vuelcos. Resulta que ahora el Che es levantado como un símbolo de lucha, como un ejemplo para las nuevas generaciones.
More than the botched military campaign and the manner of his death, Bolivia now remembers Che, the man, and his message. Forever young, unbowed, and true to his principles to the end, Che Guevara has become an immortal symbol of struggle. And just as it once celebrated his defeat, Bolivia's government and its regional allies now intone his famous rallying cry, "Hasta la victoria siempre," until victory always.